Okay, I'm going to wait till the magic phone hits 7, so we are on time here. There we go. All right, well, welcome everyone to the Lakewood City Council study session for Monday, July 25, 2022. We have several items for discussion tonight, including a review of our second quarter 2022 police report, and we're pleased to have our police chief, Mike Zarro.
Is this working? Oh. Thank you, Mayor Whalen, council members. Yes, this is our second quarter report, mostly crime stats and where we are with our different types of crime that we track, and a couple of interesting trends and things that we've seen as well. That's the last quarter that I'll talk about. As you can see, generally from first quarter to second quarter, a lot of negatives. Things are going down, with the exception of persons crimes, and I'll talk about that. There's something interesting that we noticed in our trend lines on that. Year to date, second quarter, however, what we've seen is we're still on the rise. As we compare it to last year. And, as I've talked about before, a lot of that is driven by property crimes. So as we look at, year to date, second quarter, persons versus property crimes, as you can see, our persons crimes are still, we're essentially flat from last year. And again, this is second quarter year to date, and still, historically low when you go all the way back to 2016. Property crimes, on the other hand, we did see a spike from last year, year to date, and driven largely by thefts, general thefts, and motor vehicle thefts. And total crime by quarter, this is, again, not year to date. This is just strictly by quarter. As you can see, total crime took a big drop from the first quarter, from the fourth quarter to the first quarter, and then continued in the second quarter. And as I've said, driven by property crime. And we've seen from the start of the year, reductions in different categories of property crime, to include motor vehicle theft, which was good to see. It's still high, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. But good to see at least moving in a decent direction. And persons crimes, one of the things I mentioned seeing an interesting trend is when we look back, if you look at every first quarter to the second quarter, there's an increase every time going from the first to the second. And when you think about it, it's people in hibernation for the first quarter in the winter months. The second quarter is when people are coming out, the sun's out, and I think there's more social activity, more alcohol being used, leading to more fights and bad decisions. So when we put it historically and look at it that way, when we look at the percent increase that we've seen every quarter for the first to second for the past 4 years, we did see a significant increase in 2020 in this first quarter to second quarter, a 22% increase. However, I say that with the caveat or the understanding that our first quarter was the lowest first quarter in over 3 years for persons crimes. So we did have a big spike, but we also started out very low. So it's, you never want to see an increase, especially in persons crimes. But put into context, I don't think it's I don't think it's that bad. I think it's, I don't want to say acceptable, but it's not that bad.
Are there areas in districts that you see, areas in districts in which you see more of the increase than in others? I mean, if you were to have areas of emphasis based upon your data-driven sort of policing, where are you addressing persons crimes?
Persons crimes would be found primarily in districts 2 and parts of district 4. So the Springbrook neighborhood, and then up in the town center area, the business area.
So those person crimes in town center, I presume, are related to shoplifting or burglary.
They can be fights. They can be, fights around the transit centers. There's also, it's not necessarily at the businesses. I mean, there are some residential areas within close proximity to the business center that are still part of that district. So they do happen to, it's primarily the residential areas. And then motor vehicle theft. Like I'd mentioned before, we did see a drop from the first quarter to the second quarter, still extraordinarily high, but I'll take a drop any day for these, especially when you're looking at, 327 in a quarter for the first quarter, how frequent cars are being stolen. And those are just Lakewood stolen. And I think, if I remember right, I showed you the graph after the first quarter report where it showed the state of Washington and ours matched it. So it's not just a Lakewood issue. The state of Washington saw the same increase at the same times. And then the other thing keeping our officers busy or what we're seeing, we hear a lot in the news about gun crimes. There is just a lot of guns out there being used, maybe not even shot at somebody, but just pulled out in arguments, shot up in the air, whatever the case may be. You can see the consistent trend line going back to January of 2019, consistently going up. And these are just incidents that are being reported to 911 of shots being fired or somebody actually being shot. And our officers we respond to a good number of reports of shots being fired, nobody hit, maybe some loose suspect information, but they'll show up and find shell casings at the scene. So they'll gather those and submit those for entry into IBIS, the system that tracks the ballistic stamp on the shell casing. But nobody hit and no suspects really, but a legitimate incident where shots were fired because they found shell casings. So it's not just somebody hearing fireworks. And one of the things I do get asked a lot is about comparisons to other jurisdictions. And this recently, just I think like a month ago, so it's fairly timely, WASPIC came out with their 2021 crime report. And this is based on all the jurisdictions in Washington reporting to WASPIC. So I would imagine there's some discrepancies in how things are reported, but probably pretty consistent across the state. And I pulled out the top 5 in Pierce County and then looked at King County as well and pulled some from there, just the cities that are close in size and maybe close in proximity. And as you can see, Lakewood is 4th in Pierce County. And when we look at King County, I was actually surprised to see that Tukwila and SeaTac are the only 2 that are above 100 crimes per 1,000 people. And when you look at Sumner, I was shocked that, Sumner's rate is higher than Auburn, Federal Way, and almost the same as Kent. So just some surprising numbers there. I don't really have a good explanation for that. There is, significantly more population in King County, but it's a rate. So you would think there would be some evening out, but that is where Pierce County sits. So when we do talk about Lakewood's rate, I think it's important to put it in that context and that perspective, that things in Pierce County are different than even from King County to the north.
Mr. Anderson? Chief, do we have a similar chart for violent crimes? I would, it isn't a guess, it's based on pretty strong anecdotal evidence that, the property crimes are drastically underreported in Tacoma because they don't take reports. People get a sorry response on the telephone, and the retail establishments don't call things in. But people generally tend to call in the violent crimes or their reports of them. So do we have a comparison of these same municipalities just for the violent crimes?
That could certainly be researched. These numbers were called out or identified in WASPIC's report, so it's easy for me just to pull those out. It'd be a little bit more of diving into the data from the report, but I could certainly look at that.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
And then this, I think I sent to you folks a few weeks ago when we first got it done. So this, I thought, was an interesting demonstration of the data that has come out of the pursuit legislation. And the black line on the bottom demonstrates actual pursuits. Remember, it's not a pursuit unless we're chasing them. So it shows actual pursuits where we try to stop somebody, they fled, and we pursued or we chased them. The red line are incidents where people fled and we may or may not have chased them. And you can see that there's a drastic departure right around September of 2021 where just a sharp increase in the number of incidents where people are fleeing. But we do still see a small number of pursuits. And I would say that, the number of pursuits, it went from 2.8 pursuits per month prior to September of 2021, and it went to 2.1 pursuits per month as an average. So after that, to me, that's a fairly negligible difference or reduction in pursuits, but a very sharp increase that we didn't see before of people just fleeing from traffic stops where we couldn't chase them. So I would, and I think I'd mentioned this when I presented this to you, I do feel like it is a reasonable conclusion that the legislation that was created for pursuits actually created a more hazardous environment by sort of encouraging the people in the red line to flee from traffic stops. But it had, a negligible effect on actual pursuits, which is what the legislation was intended to do. And I have seen in fact, I saw it today, one other jurisdiction, Puyallup, put together a similar chart. And it looks like this, only they don't have the decrease over the past couple months that we've seen. And I have no explanation really for that decrease. I think there's probably multiple factors. The jail opening up to a degree is one. We've been doing our pursuit emphases is probably another. And, it's just really hard to say because the number of traffic stops also plays into that as well. And then more, I think, positive news in the way of safety, especially on the roadway. Total accidents. This is, if you'll notice, this is the lowest since at least January of 2019. Number of collisions, which is outstanding. We haven't, knock on wood, had a serious collision in a while, and just our overall numbers of collisions are way down, and that is good for everybody. Because there's, most of us are out there and part of the motoring public, and that number being down affects all of us, not just for the collisions that we may or may not be in, but for our insurance rates, our collective insurance rates as well. And then a couple of positive highlights too for the quarter. We had that big group that got sworn in here. 6 of the 7 graduated. The 7th will be graduating here soon. And that was just a few weeks ago. So that was nice. Then we had 2 retirements of 2 of our longstanding employees, Detective Brent Eggleston and Sergeant Rich Hall, who both started the department, both as detectives. Rich promoted to sergeant a few years after we started, but definitely they were pillars of the department and did outstanding work. Detective Eggleston spent most of his career working in special assault, which is a tremendously difficult caseload to work for any amount of time, but let alone for close to 20 years. And then Rich was a sergeant for a lot of years in our major crimes and unit, and had a big hand in investigating some of our more high-profile homicides, like Adriana Jackson and the Walmart homicide. But both are off to, I guess, bigger and better things, or lesser and better things, yeah, right. I guess. And then finally, I wanted to include something in the way of a fireworks analysis. I also have a memo that's a little more detailed that I can send you. What I looked at, given this was sort of the second year that the new code, when it was in effect, it was passed last year, but didn't technically go into effect until this year. But we started our education push last year. So when I looked at data, at the numbers, I looked at last year's and this year's fireworks related calls for service and compared them to the previous 5 years. And this is what we found. We saw a reduction on all 3 days in calls for service related to fireworks. And believe it or not, the greatest reduction was 37% reduction in calls on the 4th. Now, I know you all live here, and there is no doubt that there were fireworks going off on the 3rd and the 5th. And it'd be hard to discern, whether they were fewer this year than last year or the last 2 years. But this is one of the few measurables that we have to go by, is the calls for service that we get. I actually expected an increase in calls for service because of the new code, because people would be calling in saying, hey, this is illegal now. But we actually saw decreases on all 3 days. With the big decrease on the 4th, the only explanation I might have for that is people were more tolerant, knowing that, something had happened and that there was a new code and you're not supposed to do them on the 3rd and the 5th, but they were at least more tolerant on the 4th, maybe. But I don't have an explanation for why it went down on all 3 days. So obviously, this is only year 2. We need a lot more years of data to really know what kind of an impact your new code had on the number of fireworks. West Pierce will probably have some data on that too at some point, so you can see how it might have impacted them. And one other thing too to point out is I looked at the weather for the past 5 years, and it was very consistent for all 5 years on these 3 days. So it was a negligible factor. It really didn't matter. So I don't know what else would have led to the reductions, but weather had nothing to do with it. So.
Yeah, Chief. The last bullet there, need more years of data for analysis to decide what? I mean, we're going to get under some pressure in the next 10 months to do something that be effective in 2024. We're going to do that, and we experimentally tried to see how a zone display would be received. Waiting to hear some feedback on that one way or the other. But I don't know that our window to do whatever is next is years in terms of adjusting the ordinance.
Well, all I can say to that is if it was me making a decision, I would want to make a decision based on accurate data, and 2 years for me wouldn't be enough. But the pressures that you all face are different than what, and the inquiries you get are different than what I get. But that would just be if I was in that position. And that's what that bullet point was there for, is this is certainly a 2-year, I wouldn't say trend, but a 2-year difference in calls for service. I don't know how much it actually tells us yet about the effectiveness of the new ordinance. I really think you would need a couple more years of data, not just from the police department, but the fire department to make an educated decision.
Is the fire department a better source of property damage and injury?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. And response to fires, and absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And I believe that's my last slide, but I did just realize that I'd forgotten one thing in talking about stolen vehicles. So I think you're all familiar with the Puget Sound Auto Theft Task Force that we're on. They have an automated license plate reader, and they took it, they've been kind of going around with it, it's mobile, and they took it into our Springbrook neighborhood recently, and in a half a day recovered 7 stolen cars. 4 of those were stolen from Lakewood. And I tried to look and see, okay, can we look at like a distance that they're stolen from and recovered to see if there's any consistencies there, if that tells us anything. And it's too much of a range. Some were stolen in Fife, some were stolen in Tacoma, the 4 were in Lakewood. So it ranged from 2 miles to 10 miles. So really that didn't tell us much. But it was a good snapshot of the kind of cars that get stolen. 5 of them were Hondas. 1 was a Kia and 1 was a Saturn. Yeah, so Hondas still, and late 90s Hondas are still the #1 car to be stolen. And they weren't stripped for valuable parts or anything. It's almost like they're just stolen and used for transportation. And that was the case with all, well, 6 of the 7. One of them, there was some DV circumstances surrounding it. So, but it wasn't like stolen and scrapped or sold or anything like that.
Regarding that you talked about the license plate readers, did the cars don't have those on them?
Our cars do not, no. We did years ago, but they became obsolete. The ones we had sort of became obsolete. And with the newer generations, and it's been a long time since we explored it, but there was a lot of, I don't want to say pushback, but a lot of, and not locally in Lakewood, but generally negative attitudes towards it from groups like the ACLU and other community groups, because a lot goes into what is captured and what is stored. And if you're driving around just in the general public, you're capturing a lot of data for people that haven't committed a crime. And that's what the argument against those is. The ALPR that was brought out from PSAT is owned by them as a state task force. So I don't know what legal advice they got on that part or what they do for storage. I just know that that's a tool that they've been using. Mm-hmm. And for us, it wasn't something that we wanted to tackle, knowing the hurdles that we would have to deal with.
Okay. Yeah, I just know other agencies that use them, and I've heard that they're really beneficial, but I don't know any of the legal ramifications or anything like that. So, I wondered if that's something that Lakewood would ever look at beyond the things that you brought up.
We could certainly explore it. I mean,
they're pretty adept at plugging in the license numbers when you do the ride along.
They are, yes. They are. But they are quick. You can go through a parking lot and it just reads plates as you go through a parking lot. I know the tribe uses them at the casino a lot, and they get a lot of stolen cars. So, and it can pick up warrants if there's the owner or there's somebody with a warrant affiliated with the car as well. So certainly something we can look into and see what other jurisdictions have done to kind of overcome some of those legal obstacles.
Does there tend to be a group of bad actors doing predominantly most of the car theft? Are they identified through the regional task force, those 4 or 5 or 10 or whatever knuckleheads that are doing this stuff?
Yes. And I do think that plays into a little bit, explains the dip that we saw in auto theft, because they've been able to get their hands on a couple of them. We know that there was, I remember Jeff Carroll, who's the sergeant that works for us, that supervises the task force, said that they had one guy that was responsible for like 5 in a month that they finally got their hands on. So when you have somebody that's that prolific, getting them in custody is going to have, absolutely have an effect. You arrest those 10 and maybe 6 come in behind them. So there's always going to be that list of frequent flyers, but that's why we're here, to keep on them.
Simplistic question, I'll go to Mr. Anderson. What do they do with these cars? Do they chop them up and sell them for parts? Do they take them out of state and sell them? I mean,
well, I think a lot of what we see is like what we saw with the 7 that were recovered here. They take them and use them for simple transportation, or they'll trade them for dope, or guns, or just use them as currency in general. Occasionally there might be a nicer car that somebody might strip down and sell for parts. And nobody's stripping down a late 90s Honda Civic. Right. So that's usually just getting stolen and traded around.
Interesting.
But nobody's getting rich off stealing cars. We're not running into millionaires that are.
It's just people getting poor from having their cars being stolen, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Anderson and Mr. Branson.
Chief, are there differences in jail protocols for taking car thieves currently?
Every jail sets their own. Well, it would be related to COVID, like COVID restrictions. Every jail would set their own restrictions. So there could be differences in how one jail, what crimes one jail would take versus another.
But that's set at the jail level for all, is your understanding?
What's that?
That's set at the jail level by different jails?
Correct.
And I just noticed, have there been any luxury car thefts? Some years ago, I went to Estonia when it broke loose from the Soviet Union, and somebody connected with the government showed me how proud they were that they changed their license plate sizes from the European size to the American size. It was because the Russian mob was bringing in so many containers of stolen American luxury cars. Do we still have an export issue like that?
Not that I'm aware of. The cars we see stolen, do see a lot of trucks. Those are of the newer cars, that's what's more prominent. But we're not seeing a lot of luxury car thefts, at least not in our area.
Yeah, somebody a couple of weeks ago stole a Ford I think it was F-250 from the marina, and left my F-150 that was 14 years old alone. They went for the new 250.
Were you insulted?
not the least.
Yeah, Chief, when you mentioned that in the recent emphasis in Springbrook that the vast majority of the cars were just being used as cars. Were the people in possession of the car post-thief? I mean, they weren't the person that stole the car, they acquired it secondhand.
In each of those cases, the cars were not occupied. They were parked, and as the task force members drove around with the ALPR, they would trigger on the parked cars. So they didn't actually get anybody in custody to interview or find out how far down the chain they were.
So we didn't really determine who was the current user of the car.
Correct. But you bring up a point that is worth making, that they can get traded for drugs or just loaned out, or they can pass through several different hands before they're ever recovered. And when we go and stop somebody or do find somebody in a stolen car, as obvious as it might be to us, we always get the story, well, my buddy Steve loaned it to me, and he let me go to the grocery store with it. I had no idea it was stolen. One of the things that we have to prove, one of the elements of the crime, is their knowledge that it was stolen. So that does become tricky. And part of that is because they do get passed around. And as you know, much as we know that it's stolen and we know that they know that it's stolen, they might be legitimately be the fourth or fifth person to drive it.
Mr. Boki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, you answered the question. So when they went and got those cars, it didn't result in directly in any arrests. The city manager sends us police blotter information, and I think I saw in there last week that there was still jail protocols or jail whatever. Do they still have restrictions on booking down at the jail, at the county jail?
There are, yes. I mean, they're much looser than what they were a few months ago, but yes, they're locked down, or not locked down. There are still some restrictions.
So is it harder? So violent crime, I assume they'll keep, but is it guys like these car thieves and stuff that are still getting rejected and sent back? Typically, yes. It'd be felony property crimes, and usually felony property crimes are a car, and that's they're usually rejected. We can, if we have a special circumstance, we can call and to the lieutenant that's in charge of the jail or running the jail on that shift and plead our case and see if they can make an exception. But generally, you're correct. The people that are in the stolen cars are the ones that we're not able to book. So I'm going to take a minute here to answer Councilmember Anderson's question. I pulled out in the second quarter incident report from 2020 that you gave us, and it goes back to year-to-date 2019. And the number in the first 6 months of 2019, we had 927 person crimes. And then that's fallen to 823 in 2020, 735 last year, and 739. And I think last year when I looked at the NIBRS, the WASPIC stuff, a lot of other cities did have major increases in violent crime. It seems like our situation just really is those cars, that the cars really are the major. In the first 6 months of 2019, there were 163 auto thefts. There were 526 this year. And that makes up, darn near half of the increase in property crime. So as soon as that number starts to, if we can get it under control, things should look up on the property crime side, I'm hoping. What are you seeing in burglaries?
Burglaries were residential burglaries, I think, are significantly down, which is good. The burglaries we are seeing are typically businesses at night and stealing catalytic converters or air conditioner parts, things like that. The other, which is the other part of the significant factor in our property crimes. You mentioned auto theft, but we also have two others, and retail theft and retail burglaries, or big commercial burglaries, are the other two that those three combined, I don't know the percentage, but would be a healthy percentage of our total property crimes.
I think, and I'll just leave with this note, I think all of us on the council cheer every time we get an email that talks about when you do one of your shoplifting emphasis things. I think at least we've heard of them twice now. And I think we were really felt good about that felt bad that there were just so many, but felt good that you guys were out there doing that.
Oh, thank you. And there's more coming up. I saw the email go out today looking for people to volunteer, and we're looking at other businesses like Lowe's and Ulta, the ones that get hit fairly frequently, and that's where we're going to be doing them. So more of those to come for sure.
Good, thank you.
A follow-up question on that with the business owners in town, or the major department chains, what has been your experience with regard to their engagement in their own security? And the reason why I ask is I have a young friend who works at Shopko in Fife, for instance, and they have a lot of weapons purchases and sporting goods purchases, and they have a very aggressive, active security detail, of which he is one, and they tackle people and take them down and handcuff them to the railing until Fife Police shows up, and they're very, very aggressive about it. And they've had a pretty effective impact on the reduction of crime in their facility. I don't know if others are doing it. I know it's a liability potential situation, but they have weighed the cost benefit and they're very aggressive.
Yes, and I think that more businesses are weighing the cost and benefit of that and going back to being more active in their own security. For a long time, they just stepped back from it and just figured the cost, it wasn't worth either the bad publicity or somebody getting hurt. If they make a bad decision, it wasn't worth the cost of all that to recover the merchandise. But what they ended up with, or we got to a point where there is absolutely zero concern by people committing these thefts of getting caught. So they would go in and take armloads and just walk out the door. And that's at all the stores. I mean, so we have seen an increase in retailers saying we are just losing too much. We have to go back to something. I know that Lowe's has increased their presence. Safeway certainly has. There's Fred Meyer has, that's right. Fred Meyer has for sure. So they're changing back and trying to recover and get back to where they were, which is going to take a while.
It would be interesting to see if there could be a community forum of business owners with professionals from various police departments to say, here's what some are doing, here's what others, here's the impact, here's what's gone well, here's what's not gone well. Just to maybe, we do the housing forums and those kinds of things. You kind of wonder if there could be a retail forum for public safety.
There absolutely could be. I spoke at the Chamber of Commerce a few months back, and there was a gentleman there who represented it's like an advocacy group for retailers, for large retailers in the Northwest. Right. So a pretty big area. And he was pretty quick to throw out stats about the losses that the businesses are experiencing.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
I think somebody like that would be more than happy to organize something.
That'd be great. Probably would be a welcomed thing to get best practices and good forum where they could communicate ideas. But there's nothing more deterrent, I think, than having to walk by someone in handcuffs at the front of your store or having their face smashed on the ground and having people see that.
You say that, but we've also gotten to a point where we can be making a shoplifting or a theft arrest out in front of the store. Somebody will steal and try and walk right past the officers. There is, the deterrent effect is just lost. So that's, I don't know what, I think it'll just take a while of holding people accountable. And there has to be the certain and swift consequence to make an impact. And it has to happen over and over again. It can't be select.
One wonders about the misdemeanors that potentially are charged here for shoplifting, right? Under certain dollar amounts of misdemeanor. And how many of those are actually prosecuted to the point of some deterrent sentence or work release or whatever program in our own municipal court, because we see, activity seems to decline and one wonders, well, are we doing anything? Are we charging it or are they prosecuting it, or is there a lack of both? I thought I'd get a response. Right?
Well, there's a combination of things that go on, and some of this takes me all the way back to my experience when I was prosecuting cases of shoplifting out at the Tacoma Mall. Some of it has to do with when it gets reported. So, for example, if you are a business that invests in pretty tight security, you're going to have more shoplifting cases than a store that doesn't invest in that level of security and takes the loss instead. And so if the police don't find out about the shoplift, there's not an arrest. If there's not an arrest, there's not a prosecution. There's also an issue of working with the businesses, between the legal department and the businesses themselves, in terms of what level of prosecution they expect. Do they want to just have merchandise returned? There's a lot of different aspects, and it really does vary business to business. And the example I would give you from the Tacoma Mall is Frederick and Nelson, who is no longer in business, had no one working security. That tells you how old I am. And Nordstrom, you knew exactly who their security people were. You never saw them in the store, but they came in all the time to testify. And so it really just varies from business to business. I don't think the police very often get a call from a concerned citizen that they've seen a shoplift, and then you come in like you would some other call. I'm guessing that, but it really does come down to the businesses a lot. And if this was something that the council was interested in pursuing as any kind of an emphasis, I would strongly recommend some good study about what the resources would be on our end and what resources the businesses are willing to put into it.
Yeah, I think maybe if they had better education about what's out there, what we're willing to do to partner with them to help create consequences. So they felt that their efforts created a sufficient deterrent, maybe that would help. I think now they just feel that the criminals are emboldened in many instances, whether or not we're prosecuting. It's just flavor du jour of what's going on in the world. I think it'd be great to bend the curve.
And I think we'd need to study some of our statistics also to figure out whether or not Lakewood is as plagued by some of the folks who just work the stores on the I-5 corridor versus folks who are truly local. And I don't know if you'd have any thoughts on that either.
Excuse me, I think it's a little bit of a mix. We see people from, that, will arrest somebody here that we know was picked up in Puyallup or in Tacoma. They just, where the transit routes go, that's where they go. There's a few that just kind of hang around in Lakewood, but for the most part, they're somewhat mobile, whether it's via public transit or one of the aforementioned stolen vehicles.
Mr. Branstad and Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I think that there's in terms of the support and how it would work with the folks like the Lowe's and the Safeways and the Walmarts and that, and then with like the small businesses in the international district and things to do that. I think the strategies that a small business can afford to do and work with us in is different than a corporate entity with multiple locations being able to go and do that. So if we were going to look to do some things to help businesses protect themselves, I recall when we had a number of years ago when we did some real outreach to some of the Asian-owned small businesses where people came in here and there were some briefings being able to go and do that, but their willingness to accept suggestions is different than someone with a security budget, okay, as opposed to just a security problem.
Right.
Chief, you mentioned kind of the having to have some ramifications that follow in close proximity to the crime or alleged crime. I became aware that I think there's still a big problem with at least Pierce County Jail taking misdemeanors for property crimes. And it's in the numbers don't lie category. The year-to-date budget for revenue at the Pierce County Jail is well below. It's something like a quarter. It's certainly not a half of what was budgeted. And the primary explanation for that is that the population consists of a super high percentage of felons, which the county has to pay for instead of revenue producing misdemeanors from Tacoma and Puyallup and Lakewood and other places. So the budget doesn't lie. I mean, they just didn't collect that money. So is the Nisqually jail or some other place a functional alternative that kind of mitigates that for us? Or?
They're a very functional alternative. We have a lot of success in getting people booked in that, that we need to down at Nisqually, particularly our repeat folks. If we've got somebody that is a repeat offender, we don't have a problem getting them booked in down there.
Thanks. Anything else on that?
Not on that, no. I will say that, going back to my slide on the retirements and the hirings, we have, I know, at least 4 retirements next year other than myself. So hiring and comings and goings are going to be big for us. And then in 2024, we're going to have even more retirements. So a lot at the supervisor level. So a lot of changes coming to the department, but you'll see it reflected in our budget request as well when that time comes. But just know that hiring and staffing is going to be a front burner issue for us for a couple of years.
Where are we now, 95?
We are at 97, I believe, on paper. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow's one officer's last day. He and his family are moving to Arizona. The 7 that I showed you are mm-hmm. still in training.
We lost one a month or so ago. Did we replace that gentleman yet?
Yes. Okay. Yes. And we have 3 starting next Monday. 2 are entry level and 1's a lateral. Mm-hmm. So the laterals obviously get out and count quicker, but those 2 are going to be, at the academy and in training for several months before they count. So it's just the game that we play, but it is going to be something that we'll be actively working on for a while.
What's the full staffing numbers?
Budgeted 95, but we have been authorized to go over to account for the attrition that we're seeing.
And it sounds like our experience and at least positive work in attracting new applicants is better or similar than other jurisdictions in our area.
We're doing well, which when I compare to, unfortunately, the Sheriff's Department mm-hmm. and Tacoma, who are down a lot of people, or even if you go up to like Seattle, I don't know how you hire hundreds of people at a time. I don't know how you would ever even do that, but we are able to get some good quality people applying and through the process and hired. It's the length of the process that kills us and keeps us kind of behind the 8 ball.
Very good. Well, thank you for all your good work, Ms. Farmer, Ms. Deputy Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, have you started to recruit, or when will you start to recruit to, nobody can replace you, but mm-hmm. to step in your chief role?
Well, I haven't decided who I'm going to hire yet, but no, that is the man sitting behind me. That will be his decision.
When the process starts?
Yeah, we're still working on that, on exactly what the process is going to look like, and we'll do, I would imagine, some backwards planning from February 17th to figure out when, each step of the process will occur.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the hiring conversation, I didn't look at the governor's announcement close enough to see if his changes in the training academies, will that affect us at all? Help things get through a little faster?
Maybe a little bit. For us, what he's proposing is to create more academies throughout the state. So it's more regionalized. So, if Richland PD hires somebody, they don't have to send them to Burien for 4 months. Where that also helps is you know, the academy relies on departments contributing officers for 3 years at a pop to help teach. So right now, if you're only in Darien and in Spokane, those, you know, it has to be officers within commuting distance to those locations. But if you have, you know, one in the Tri-Cities or one up in Wenatchee or up towards Bellingham, you can draw officers from, you know, all those other agencies to help teach, which sort of lessens the load for everybody and makes it easier to get people into classes. So while we don't have extraordinary waits right now to get into classes, it would be even quicker once that proposal goes through.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
National Night Out, you good to go?
We are ready. National Night Out next Tuesday. We'll, you know, I think there's gonna be fewer events than what we've experienced in the past. I think people are still, you know, trying to shake off the COVID fog, but there'll be some good events out there and some people that have always supported National Night Out are coming back and doing their events again. So we'll be out there.
Is there any sort of consistent data thing you're going to present to some of these neighborhoods that are gathering together just to kind of give them an overview, or just off the cuff?
It'd just be off the cuff.
Okay.
Just what we know, a lot of what I've been talking to you folks about for, you know, the past year or more about car thefts and property crimes and things like that. We might have some brochures and stuff to hand out on theft prevention and auto theft prevention. So
bring a catalytic converter so we can see what it looks like.
This is what it is. Yeah.
I have one more.
Sure. Deputy Mayor Moss.
Chief, other than lost parents at Summerfest, were there any other issues that you were dealing with?
There were not. From a public safety perspective, there was some, as you would have with any large event like that, traffic issues. Yeah. Some of that, both vehicle and pedestrian. There's a few things we're gonna, that our lieutenant that worked on it and put the security plan together, identified for next year, like lighting and things like that. But by and large, it was a very well attended, well-run event. The lost parents was, I won't say lost kids, because we found the kids before we found the parents. But we did have several incidents of lost parents that we had to track down and reunite with their children. But other than that,
the beer tent.
That happened once. Yes. So, but other than that, it was a very easy event as far as public safety goes.
Great. Yep. Thanks for coming.
All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Appreciate the report and look forward to more good news. All right. Next, we've got our City Council retreat follow-up on the Homelessness and American Rescue Plan Act possible funding for various organizations that have submitted applications for this. We have our planning manager, Tiffany Spear. It says will join us virtually, but you must be a figment of our imagination because you're here. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tiffany Spear. And I do have a virtual presentation for you, but this does begin on page 17 of this evening's City Council packet as well. Maybe this is on, sorry. There we go. So quickly, I just wanted to bring to your attention the fact that the 2022 point in time count that was conducted in January by Pierce County, the data was recently released. And so you'll see in 2022, there was 1,184 total sheltered. There were 82 sheltered individuals in Lakewood. There were 343 unsheltered countywide and 5 unsheltered in Lakewood. If you try to compare this, it's difficult to do it with 2021 because due to COVID, they did not count unsheltered people at all. So it's an anomaly year. But what you will see is that over time, there's been kind of an up and a down with the numbers specific to Lakewood. This number is as of July 1st of this year, talking about the number of people that are living in Lakewood before becoming homeless, and then if they were living in Lakewood before becoming homeless, where they live now. So this is the Homeless Management Information System where people are reporting information into the system that's handled countywide called coordinated entry. But what you see there is roughly half, 53% of those currently homeless in Lakewood were reporting that they lived in Lakewood prior. Out of the total that were living in Lakewood before becoming homeless total, about half of them are now in Tacoma, 42% in Lakewood, and then about 18% are in an emergency shelter somewhere in Greater Pierce County. So that's just background information for you. Not everybody answers all of these questions when they are asked them. So for instance, if you were to go back here to the question whether their last reported zip code was inside or outside of Lakewood, it doesn't match to the totals, either countywide or city numbers. They report as best they can based on who answers the question. But just to reorient us all to ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act, there's 6 or 7 approved subsections of the plan where funds can be spent that are allocated to what Lakewood is considered an entitlement city. And they include public health, negative economic impacts, services to disproportionately impacted communities, premium pay, infrastructure, revenue replacement for government services, and then administrative costs. So far, the City Council has taken action here. In summary, it totals about 7.2 million, which means you have about 6.5 million outstanding in ARPA funds as yet to be allocated or set aside for future use. On May 31st, there was a second retreat that the council held, and this is a summary of what was expressed on that day regarding how the council may want to proceed to allocate the remainder of those funds, focusing on what the Lakewood community needs, making permanent investments or legacy investments in the city, making sure that there is adequate performance metrics and tracking and progress from all of the fund subrecipients, which is that term that's used in ARPA, perhaps holding some funds back for a future obligation. And then there were some additional, more specific comments made about whether to consider funding or not for types of projects. So yes, for mobile mental health services, capital expenditures, maybe a catalyst project was thrown out, providing support to the Cohen Military Family Clinic, various types of housing, and then staffing for the Lakewood Police Department's body-worn camera program. It was stated not to consider funding those benefits or programs that are available to be funded at other levels of government, premium pay or vaccine incentives. So the other thing that has happened this year is we did have a number of organizations reach out and submit requests that in some respect are responsive to what the council voiced on May 31st. And so this is just a summary of those. There were a number of other applications submitted earlier this year, but these are the ones that most closely answered what the council discussed in May. First of all, the request did come in from the Cohen Veterans Clinic. The Emergency Food Network is asking for funds for a new warehouse. LASA has 2 requests in. One is for their hygiene center. The other is for a subsidized housing unit construction near their current offices. Again, the Lakewood body camera program staffing, and then Nourish Pierce County most recently submitted a request also for capital construction, purchasing an existing building in Lakewood to move from where they are now in order to improve their ability to store food and also distribute it. And then there were some other things that were talked about on May 31st, perhaps purchasing a hotel, talking about support perhaps for Community First Village that the county is in the process of planning. And then also, are there other types of catalyst projects? There was a question asked on July 5th about the types of funding which are also available at other levels for food banks in particular. And what I was able to find was that federal, state, and local funds are all available, along with private grants or foundations. Most of what is available, though, seems to be for the actual food delivery to the bank and also distribution out, more so than any sort of capital investments or support. So the requests we have from Emergency Food Network and also Nourish Pierce County wouldn't necessarily be able to seek funding from any of these sources, or that would be not enough to meet their need. So the next steps for you as a council, making sure that staff understands the types of project that you would like to have funded going forward. If the decision is to go ahead and issue requests for proposal, I think there was some discussion about having that happen, but maybe if there's any other clarification about that you want to provide to staff. And then also once those would be issued and applications received, those would come back to you for final decision as to where funds may be spent. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I would just turn it back to you and see if there's any questions or other conversation you wish to have.
Well, thank you. I think it's worth having some conversations based on the materials presented, at least with regard to the possible ARPA projects on page 21 and 22 of our materials, and anything else the council wants to kind of chat about for the good of the order. Deputy Mayor Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, if I understood you correctly, there's not enough funds to support the EFN warehouse building that they're requesting?
Not in the funding that's available from other sources. Like if you were to look at the one that's under the state, the last sentence there, it says awards may range up to for $5,000 for equipment and installation costs. Most of the dollars in all of these sources seem to be for the food itself, not for building a place or a distribution center.
Is there a fund that would support them?
I was not able to find one easily when I did my preliminary research here.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I like the recommended next steps in that when we prepare, if we do an RFP, it should be what we want them to do. And so I don't think the place we start is necessarily the list of people who have kind of self-motivated, put in a request for money, because we shouldn't start with, what do you want to do? It's what we want done. The one that isn't emphasized that I think presents a particularly good alternative is taking a serious look at partnering for a single, for a veterans homeless shelter in Tillicum, because of its proximity to the base and veteran services, because we have a piece of property that we own there that is zoned appropriately, and because there isn't that facility in Pierce County, and we don't have a single male shelter in Lakewood, so we'd be picking up it's kind of a specialized version on behalf of the county as a whole, because we could find, I think, a willing partner who can operate it, somebody like Tacoma Rescue Mission or like. And probably more importantly, because there's the potential for having continuing funding to operate it, which is the thing that's lacking in many of these one-time requests, because there are federal funds available for veterans housing and services that have been allocated on a continuing basis and aren't just one-time shots in the dark with ARPA funding. So when we look at some of these, and I look at many human service projects every day, we need to say, is this really in some cases, is this really a community charity? And my version of a community charity or definition is something that's broadly supported by the community through donations and fundraising that sustains itself and comes to you for some one-time money. Most of the folks who are lining up for ARPA money, not necessarily picking on any of these, are government contractors who happen to be nonprofits. They don't have a way to sustain things. They come for the one-time money, and then 18 months from now, they'll be knocking on the door and say, well, you started us up. We want you to keep us going. They don't have other funding sources. So it's a long way around saying if we want to do something structurally for For homelessness, we need to say, first and foremost, is there a way that this will be sustained after we put our money in? I also think for the veterans emphasis that we can get money out of the state homelessness funds, we can get money out of county homelessness funds as contribution that would be much larger than what we put in. So it could be doable as a partnership. So I'd like us to seriously consider that, but also whatever it is, say, what's this going to look like 3 years from now? Is it going to be, is there a way to sustain it, or is going to somebody be knocking on our door say, well, we need a whole bunch of money out of your general fund so we can keep going?
Mr. Brandstatter.
I also like the next steps. That's a pretty simple set of next steps, but you know, I think that going to an RFP process as opposed to an application process is, you know, gets us to some things that will actually address community needs, okay, as we in the community define them rather than somebody envisions creating a role for themselves. I also think $6 million isn't that much money when you're trying to actually do some things that are impactful. So I think we're really need to say that we're maybe looking at 3, perhaps 4 focus areas to invest this money in the community, and that each would be a separate RFP as we can go to find out, and they don't all have to be issued at the same time. You know, as we develop what we need, we can go to do that. So yeah, I'm interested in moving forward in this thing to do that, recognizing that finalizing the list may be finalize it to say this one thing definitely, and then maybe the next definite thing is not fully determined until a bit later. I mean, we are still on a 2-year timeline to actually even identify what we want to spend it on, and almost a 4-year timeline to actually get it spent. So I don't think we should be like some other jurisdictions that have already committed every single dime that they got.
Any other comments or questions on that? It looks like we're getting some consensus built to proceed with an RFP process, as long as we kind of define what we're hopeful to accomplish with the money. And do we have sufficient guidance there? I think your green, yellow, red rubric on page 42 is
okay. I don't think that's in the PowerPoint, but yeah,
probably close to what we're looking for.
Okay. If I could, Mr. Mayor, bring your attention back to what was discussed in May. Are these ideas that you would want to be seeking RFPs about, or is there anything on here that you would want to take off, where the list of do consider or don't consider funding?
Let's see.
And I guess the other question is, are you ready to begin this conversation, assuming that you will be exhausting all of the funds through this RFP process, meaning none is set aside for some unknown future use?
I don't see something under the do consider that necessarily encapsulates the warehouse and distribution for EFN as a type of possible funding consideration. But I think we did talk about them specifically as a Lakewood business, longstanding Lakewood facility. It's a capital item that would inure to the benefit long-term of Lakewood residents. Yeah, completely. And just for your edification, I did get an email from them. Of course, they're pretty aggressive about it, but they wanted to update us on their capacity building campaign. They're at 60% or 3.2 million of their $5.3 million goal. So they're doing good work to raise the money from a variety of partnerships to leverage the funds to create the capital infrastructure in Lakewood.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
The information I received recently, just within the last week from Nourish Pierce County, was somewhat similar. They understand, and I can't name names apparently, but they've been talking to a business that has a building here that they want to sell within the city. That would be a much better location and distribution opportunity for them. So it's a new thing.
At the church, right?
It's not the church.
No, but they're currently operating.
Yeah, wherever they're from, it's not ideal. They're wanting to move, and this is a pretty quick transaction. So I don't know if they'll be around still to ask for this, but they're also fundraising other than asking for these opportunities.
I know exactly what they're looking at and
yeah,
where they're approaching that particular building facility.
Okay.
So it makes good sense, but an RFP would give them a chance to provide a response. Yes.
Yeah. With respect to if there was something that I wanted to winnow off of this list, I think I'm not necessarily thinking that this is the right funding to use for a catalyst project from the legacy plan. I don't necessarily think we want to use these dollars for in the parks capital realm. I think that goes on there. And I think that I agree with Councilmember Anderson that under housing, I think it's more of a veteran shelter capacity, combining two of those bullets that we're considering being able to go and do, not necessarily so that maybe we can combine those two bullets and go there. And I have a hard time seeing how I tie the ARPA rules about the impact of that to a senior housing project. Not that senior housing isn't a need. I just, it wasn't that we lost a lot of senior housing because of COVID or other things. It's been, you've been talking about where a senior is going to go to live so that other people can move into the house that they're living in for 10 years or more. So I think the housing list could be more targeted, and it's maybe more of a homeless than a housing housing focus given that we are still supposed to draw lines back to the pandemic.
What about taking off the staffing for administration? I think that should come off the list if we're looking at lasting impact, in my humble opinion. But, right. That's well, obligation.
Did we not already, what did we already approve in the timeline of that? There was a timeline that we already approved the last,
right?
Because we back in that, in May, there was something that we gave the city manager the okay on.
I thought with the new system, they might not actually need that person.
It was.
I would, yeah, I'd prefer making a more lasting impact.
Not because there isn't a need, but because the existing and current and ongoing support is going to come from somewhere else. I think we should eliminate the support and expansion of mobile health services, more behavioral mental health services. We are participants in the behavioral health tax, which is operated through Pierce County. There are resources to the extent that they're short on providers and staffing the programs that have a funding source. So our contribution would be maybe not meaningless, but it would be absorbed and wouldn't be noticeable. Plus it's the mental health by state constitution is state responsibility. Money's coming through the county. Why is the city putting money into it?
Seems sort of interesting data that came from the school district folks the other day. You know, there's resources available. They're just not using them. So I agree with you on the mental health piece. So I hear housing focus. Seems like there's not opposition to the EFN capital focus for the building. And we're talking about, I guess, housing and that and distribution for services. Not staffing, not mental health expansion, no catalyst projects from the legacy plan.
What about the two losses?
That would be housing. Yeah.
The hygiene project?
A little different. Yeah, that's a good point. So that would be a capital project for the delivery of services. Yeah. So that could be within that category. That works for me. How about the rest? Are you all comfortable with that?
I didn't hear it.
I'll have Tiffany repeat it. And I see your hand up there, Paul. Mr. Boki, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. I don't, as much as we like it, the Cohen Veterans Clinic, that's just operational stuff. So that doesn't seem to kind of meet our guidelines, I think, right? I mean, and I'm willing to look at the housing elements. I'm just wondering how long that LAHSA project is going to take, and are they going to need, I mean, what percentage of, I'll be interested to see the RFP from LAHSA, because I'm trying to understand how much of that project we're being asked to take on. And that's the 27 units of housing. And then I'm also, since this one came up late, this Nourish Pierce County, I know they do a lot of good work, but you know, before we go on that, I think we need to understand, I know they do different work than EFN because EFN's the umbrella, but I need to kind of understand what they're doing here in Lakewood and what that's going to do for them. So those would be my points on that.
Could be fleshed out in an RFP they submit, I assume.
Yes. And I'm sorry, Mr. Brokey, my mic was off. What I had just said back to the mayor was veterans housing, emergency shelter, the food bank capital expenditures, the Lakewood PD body worn camera program staffing, and then funding for LAHSA's capital expenditures.
Yeah.
If that's not.
Are we still, I wasn't sure we had the staffing for admin for the body cams.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there consensus on that? We've done
again, I thought that we already dealt with that back in May, where we, at the end of it, one of the last things we did is we said, that's the one thing that we were ready to approve in May to go forward, because the city manager needed it to be out the next biennium's budget and other things.
That was to buy the cameras.
No, it actually had to do with staffing in the legal department. Okay, to be able to make, and to be able to get the program on firm footing once cameras at the end of this year, when we finally have cameras on the chest of people, then we had a need, because we're using a cloudy crystal ball to figure out all the public records and editing things to do that. And the city manager asked us to give him the go ahead to do that, because it's necessary, and it's got to be funded in the next biennial budget. And this is a way to get it off the ground, so that then beyond that it can be right-sized and funded in the general fund. But that's so I really think that the records of that meeting showed that that was actually something that we, by consensus, approved.
Ms. Bell.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with that is what it is for. It is for admin. And I just want to reiterate the fact that they are going to need staff, one staff to review this. It's not something that the program can do. It's very intensive and it does need to be funded. So I am in support of that.
Okay. It's going to have to be funded, whether it's ARPA funding. I guess that'll be a decision. Yeah, right. Okay, so I guess that can be included in the list for now.
Okay.
And then we'll see how it shakes out.
All right. Thank you very much.
Well, that is it for the items for discussion tonight. The items tentatively scheduled for the August 1 regular city council meeting are presented. We've got a couple of proclamations. We'll have the school district report. And we've got a couple of authorization agreements for funding for certain items. Now we can turn to our reports by the city manager, Mr. Caulfield.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members. Good to see everybody. Councilmember Boki, can you hear me?
Yep.
Radio check over. All right.
Over.
He's flying his own jet, it looks like.
Well, just wanted to start off with Summerfest. Let me tell you what I don't have is we don't have a final count of the number of people that were there. We should have that in the next few days or so. Our staff are still going through. Actually, the truth of the matter is they're taking a little bit of a break from putting on the event, and then they're rolling right into farmers market and a concert tomorrow evening. So wanted to give them a little bit of a breather. But overall, the Summerfest was, I think, a fantastic success. Great weather, outstanding vendors, activities, performers across the board. The traffic, the traffic control systems that were put in place worked really, really well. I mean, there was congestion, but that's because it's a very popular event. But as far as the flow of traffic onto Fort Steilacoom Park and off Fort Steilacoom Park, probably the best that we've had it. And I want to compliment Mary Dodsworth and her team is working with LPD and the Public Works Department on facilitating that. Also, the drone show seemed to have been a hit. We haven't heard any negative feedback on it. And the music worked, so Ms. Dodsworth didn't have to get out a microphone and sing along because we always have contingency plans in place, and that was the backup. But overall, it all went very well and came together. And I do want to recognize Ms. Dodsworth and her team, particularly Sally Martinez, and actually everybody here at the city, because a lot of different departments were involved in pulling that off. But it was apparent that there continues to be pent-up demand for these types of activities and events for people to get out and about in a very safe environment. And I would also say that this event went off without any kind of nonsense or any type of not so positive activity. Everybody came to have a fun time, and it was done in a very safe manner. So overall, I think we had like one little missing child for a short period of time, and then some missing parents from their children because the children were looking for their parents. And then I think the fire district as well, I don't think had any calls for service. I think probably because the weather was just so perfect. So, but overall, I thought it was a good success, but we'll have some more information on some of the statistics. Actually, I do know one thing. Two of the vendors reported. So the vendor that does the ice cones, the shaved ice, and the guy that does the popcorn, who apparently has been selling popcorn. He might have been around when he invented popcorn, but both of them had their single best day ever in all the years that they had been doing this work, which apparently for each of those vendors has been a long, long time. So those were just two of the vendors.
Sure. While you're on this, thank you, Mr. While you're on that topic, one of the things that I heard was that the Taste of Tacoma is moving to the fairgrounds. And they said, beware for the event that we have because we will have probably more people attending that as opposed. So just a heads up.
That was already.
Yeah, Okay. It's going to grow from what they were saying.
Again, we had perfect weather. The weather here in the next few days is going to heat up a little bit. So we're going to be making this facility here available as a cooling center, most certainly on beginning tomorrow morning, go from about 10 to 8 and on Wednesday, and we'll see how it goes on Thursday. Now on Wednesday, it'll be a little different in here because our hearing examiner is actually going to be holding a public hearing as it relates to Western State Hospital's master facilities plan. So we'll be doing a dual role. There'll be a public hearing going on, but then if people want to sit in the audience, we won't have Netflix on, so they can listen to the hearing examiner and listen to watch Western State Hospital's master facility plan. So that will be really, really exciting. Also, the city, we're part of that regional emergency management team with West Pierce Fire and Rescue, the town of Steilacoom, and City of University Place. And all of our agencies are working together to make, water, for example, available to our more vulnerable folks out in the community. So that's actually been going on, but it'll be ramped up here in the next few days with the temperatures getting up and potentially into the mid-90s. On the federal side, I just want to report that thanks to our federal delegation, starting off with Congresswoman Strickland, the NDAA language that we wanted regarding the North Clear Zone has made it in on the House committee report. And later this week, I'm going to be meeting with representatives from our two senators' office to reemphasize, so that happens over on the Senate side when they begin pulling together their NDAA. Also, Congresswoman Strickland let us know last week that the House passed an appropriations package that contains our request for $2.5 million in support of the last phase of South Tacoma Way between 80th and 88th. And then likewise, that's now going over to the Senate. So we'll emphasize that with our two US senators as well. So two key priorities there moving along. The Library Advisory Committee, they had their first meeting on Thursday, June 30th. And so there's some, the library district has launched a webpage where they have all of that information. We're going to be somewhat mirroring that a little bit, so folks can come to the city's website as well to get that information. 10 of the 12 committee members showed up. They had a good first meeting in terms of who, what, where, when, why. And they did not have a meeting this month in July just because of schedules. So they're going to get up and going again in August. Their goal is they are still on target to have a recommendation to the Board of Trustees and to this board by the early part of November. I think as I've noted in the past, what we'd like to do is to try and have a joint meeting with you and the Board of Trustees so the committee can then present that at the same time to both legislative bodies on that. So I'll keep you posted on that. They're also done a survey as well. So if you haven't seen that, we'll make it available on our end as well, just seeking some feedback from the community. So again, it's moving on. Also, the library district is continuing their search for a temporary location here specifically in the downtown. They had expanded it to other areas of the city, but they quickly realized that probably wasn't going to work for them. And so now they're back focused in on the downtown. So as I have more information on that, I'll be sure to share that with you. LTAC kicks off their process on August 1st, the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee, or rather the Lodging Tax Allocation process. I just wanted to let you know, we did reach out to the historical Fort Steilacoom Association, and they actually receive LTAC dollars. In the past, they have from an M&O standpoint for their marketing and communication standpoint. But we did let them know, after a conversation myself and the mayor and the previous mayor, Councilmember Anderson, had with them last year, that they had some needs perhaps as it relates to their buildings. And so we just reminded them, that's something that you can apply for. They will have to get support from Western State Hospital and or DSHS because they don't own the buildings. But we just let them know that. Likewise, we reached out to the Clover Park Technical College. I actually spoke with the president and just mentioned to her, the McGavick Center, if you have any needs over there, just again, letting her know. And she said, certainly if not this year, maybe next year. She mentioned, sound improvements and things like that. So just wanted to follow up with you on that. I mentioned the Western State Hospital Master Plan. So that's coming before the hearing examiner. A lot of documents there. I do want to compliment our team, specifically our planning manager, Courtney Brunell, and our building official, Rafiq Gindi, for really kind of handhold the state a little bit through that process to get a presentation in front of the hearing examiner. Last week, we were notified by the Department of Commerce that the city is receiving 3 grants. One of them is kind of an automatic. Actually, it is an automatic. It's a $175,000 grant to support our periodic update of our our comprehensive plan, so that's consistent with the GMA, the Growth Management Act. That'll kick off this time next year, actually. However, we did apply for 2 other grants, a $100,000 grant to also include in our housing element middle housing as a component of our housing plan. And so we did apply for that grant, so that we were awarded that. And then we also received a $50,000 grant for early implementation of our climate plan that we have in our comp plan, so the action strategy. And actually that strategy is going to be coming back to this body. The Planning Commission has made a recommendation on that, so it'll be coming back here shortly. So now we have $50,000 to help move that along and begin implementing that. Also, Transportation Improvement Board, transportation grants, kind of a similar process that we've done the last couple of years, which more cities should take advantage of, is that first and foremost, we invited out TIB personnel to kind of do a tour with the city in terms of, hey, what do you think works? What doesn't work? So we're not spinning our wheels or wasting our time. Long story short, based on the conversation that we had with TIB, or rather a Public Works Department did, we'll be looking to apply for construction funds in support of Union Avenue over in Tillicum, kind of that last stretch that is needed over there between Berkeley and Thorn Lane. And then also 40th and 100th, that whole intersection, that's kind of that missing piece as it comes around from Pierce Transit. Unfortunately, 100th, that stretch between Lakeview and South Tacoma Way, TIB, for lack of a better term, they don't like that project yet. But certainly a component of it they do. And then also maybe applying for funds in support of Custer between John Dower and Bridgeport, and then also maybe a couple of new signals that we had applied for in previous grants that we're expecting to be notified here in the near future. So they may or may not be included. But again, it was good conversation with TIB to, again, get good feedback from them so that we don't have to kind of waste our time, so to speak. We also applied for 2 Pierce County sewer ARPA projects, actually our next 2 sewer extension lines that are coming up to help buy down some of those. The one that's currently under design is to extend sewers and these are both down in the Tillicum neighborhood, Rose Road, Forest Road, and Fern Street. And then the second one, which would kick off design in 2024 with construction in 25, I believe, is Wadsworth, Silcox, and Boat Road. And both of those projects are actually down close toward the lake side of Tillicum. So we submitted that. And if I recall, Pierce County, it's not just sewer, it's actually a water and sewer ARPA account. I think they have $10 million. And I think our asks are about a little over $1 million, I think. Or maybe close to 2 million. Correction, yeah, close to 2 million with the 2 projects. Mentioned Summerfest Farmers Market. Also tomorrow night, another Summer Nights at the Pavilion at Fort Steilacoom Park. And then also on Thursday evening, Community Coffee House at Fort Steilacoom Park Pavilion, where the subject matter will be transportation projects. So Mr. Busich will be out there with his team and with the mayor having that presentation and that discussion on all that is transportation. So pardon the progress out there. All things are getting underway. And then Mayor and Council, the last item I have, it's kind of been hanging out there, and I just, wanted to know if there was council consensus or you wanted to give me council direction as it relates to this whole issue of a de-annexation from the library district. And I know it came up at a meeting before I went out of town, and then when I was out of town, it came up again. And I think last week, a member of the council might have mentioned it. And if that's something, I just need to know if that's something that you want to undertake or not. And if so, we can certainly do that. I just want to say, just from a capacity standpoint, we're in budget right now. So I would need a little bit of time to actually do the study itself, or bring in some assistants to do it. But I just need some consensus or some direction, Mayor.
Yep, let's open it up for discussion. Mr. Anderson and Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, I don't think it's a particularly time-sensitive issue, but I would like to see at least good back-of-the-envelope numbers on what it would mean. I suspect from my back-of-the-envelope numbers that it may be too expensive to be a viable alternative in the long run, but I would like to make an informed decision when I vote no, rather than try to justify to people that, yeah, we thought about that and didn't think it was a good idea. I'd like to be able to say, we didn't have $1.5 million a year to subsidize it, and we didn't think a bond had passed to build the building. But I think we should have somewhat close to real numbers to make this decision in an informed manner.
Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with at least looking at it as a feasibility type study, and would kind of like to have at least some rudimentary knowledge about what that option looks like. I don't expect that option to come out of the Library Advisory Committee, but as we hear what they're recommending that and the process and timelines that they have, this will give us something to compare it to, and something for the community to compare it to. I mean, ultimately, the long-term resolution of a permanent library in Lakewood is going to be left up to the voters to decide whether they want to foot the bill to be able to go and do that. You know, we lived off of a free library for 50 years, but now there's some cost to it. And I'd rather get started on that now rather than waiting until we hear what the Library Advisory Committee and the Library Board now think what we should do, so that we're
ready,
able to do that.
Mayor Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, I'm thinking that we needed to wait to see what the new management plans are before we step up to take over that portion of it. If they have plans, then we can see how we can support them, rather than giving them the option to think that we are going to do it. It's just the way my brain worked.
Ms. Farmer?
I agree with Councilmember Anderson that this is not time sensitive. At least it isn't to me. I do not want to get out ahead of the Library Advisory Committee. We in good faith, the city, helped put that committee in place, and others may want to get out ahead of it, but I personally don't. I don't know that we want to be in the library business, but I do know that we do need to have the information. We do need to make an informed decision. But I don't know. We're going to go into budget season, and so that's a pretty big ask of staff. So I would prefer we wait a little while.
Sounds like we have consensus to do it. It sounds like the discretion as to when is with you on your staff availability. And as we've heard, we don't want to jump ahead of the committee's work on behalf of the library district at this time. But it's something we want to learn about and be ready to discuss at some point in the fall or late fall, early winter.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
All right. Anything else? Any other questions for Mr. Caulfield on that? Paul, any other questions? I don't see you with your radar. I see your hand out.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for recognizing that I'm still here. I appreciate that. the only thing I have to say about the library, and I agree with I just need to understand the legal steps. I mean, how would we get from square one to square four? I don't think we have time right now, nor it would take some effort, I think, and some study and probably some commitment of some dollars to actually figure out what the costs and things would look like. And I do believe that we need to let the process of this ad hoc committee play out. They're not going to be at it that long, and then make a decision about whether or not we want to go forward with a study that we can use to actually take to the public. But that would come at some future date.
Very good. I think that's consistent with our consensus. So great, thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and quickly move to council comments because we do have an executive session after this. Mr. Branstetter. Okay, Ms. Farmer.
I'm good, thank you.
Ms. Bell.
Just want to say I enjoyed Summerfest. It was fabulous. The staff did a wonderful job. It was above and beyond. That's it.
Great. Mr. Anderson.
Last Tuesday, we went to the farmer's market until went to the Olsen Brothers band performance, and a good time was had by all. Also pleased to report, knock on wood, that it appears that the WashDOT bike path trail project between Lakewood and DuPont remains on track, funded, and it's just a matter of going through the mechanics, not if it's going to happen. But
does this
include
last
I heard it would connect Lakewood and DuPont through North Fork.
Got it. Mr. Boki, anything?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do, because I had meetings I went to last night. There was mention of the Planning Commission. They did approve their climate plan. I think it has 31 items on it. So when we take that up, we may want to make decisions as to whether or not we want to proceed on all 31 items. Of course, that's down from like 86 items that they had before, but they have forwarded that to us. They have also moved the tree retention ordinance with the changes that they've made. They made a number of changes. They did have some debate about some changes that evening, and I think the city manager forwarded you that information as to what changes have been made since it went through the committee. So I think both the ad hoc committee and the planning commission worked very hard on the tree ordinance. So and now it will be put into our lap. So we've got some big decisions to make. On Thursday night, it was PCRC, Pierce County Regional Council. There were no action items, but there were 4 presentations. One was on House Bill 1220, which adds element to the housing, which adds elements to the housing element of the comprehensive plan. And it is, and I think Ms. Spear will have a very good understanding of it. So in the future, she can talk to us about it, but it much more extensive information about how you're providing for the various levels of housing: moderate, low, very low, extremely low, permanent supportive housing, emergency shelter. So all those things are on there, and they're actually posting a tool on the Department of Commerce website. I think it was supposed to be up today. And I'd like to go take a look at it to kind of just give you information on what they're doing, but it'll be part of the periodic update in 2024. There was also a presentation by the Flood Control Zone District. They're having a round of funding outside of the Opportunity Fund for various projects. I know 2 are going in front of the County Council tomorrow, and they're about fish barrier passage removal, improving fish passage in several locations in the county. I don't know that we've put anything in there or not in this round of funding. It's outside of the Opportunity Fund. Then there was a presentation by SHAPE. Jason Gaudier and actually Executive Dan Meyer were both on that. And then our Tiffany Spear did a very nice job talking about the comp plan update. So that's what occurred. That's what occurred at the Pierce County Regional Council. So no action items, but it was interesting. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Just three quick things. Summerfest was a success. I'm going to turn to Deputy Mayor Moss, and she'll tell you the same. Deputy Mayor Moss?
I was just trying to subtly give you a hint.
I was going to get you. I was going to give you the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had the opportunity on Thursday to present a proclamation to the National Auto Body Codes Council Recycle Ride. Yeah. That was a beautiful event. It was very heartwarming. USAA was celebrating their 100th anniversary, and they were giving away 100 refurbished cars throughout the country. And 5 members of JBLM were recipients of the cars, and they had the cars parked out here. They even had it set up really nice.
Right out here?
Right out here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very nice. A lot of the collision companies pulled together and donated their time and resources to refurbish the cars. So, and I got to see some people I hadn't seen for a long time. So it was really a good event, well done and well attended as well. Summerfest, LMCC had their booth out there. We did a lot of communication with the members. They were happy to see us there. A lot of them didn't know that Lakewood had such a program. And so it's growing. And I also talked to one of the ambassadors for the Pierce Transit, and they're offering on September 1st, all youth age 18 and under can ride for free. They said, if you have your ORCA card, don't put more money on it, but they will be helping you with, it's a free ride. On 18, it didn't say how long it was gonna go on, but I think it's through the month of September. So that's all I have.
Actually, the 18 and under is going to be more permanent because the legislature passed some money, and transit agencies like Pierce had to go back and change their internal policy and code and fund or ticket pricing, so you can't charge kids now in order to avail yourself of the state money for this big largesse that's coming through. So we took off about $800,000 of revenue that we would get from 18 and under in exchange for something close to $2 million that we're getting from the state. So it was a win-win. What's that? Yeah, exactly. So back to my comments before I was so interrupted by the deputy mayor. Yeah, exactly. Now, Summerfest is great. I just echo the comments. Really well done, really well coordinated, fantastic. Very good comments by all the folks I saw there. I am going to do the coffee house this Thursday. It's all things lead through and to Lakewood on roads. And looking forward to Mr. Busich and his presentation on that and the community feedback. And hopefully we'll get into some of the non-motorized transportation issues and feedback from members of the community as well. And finally, the Asia Pacific Cultural Center has a lot of stuff going on this week. And the Samoa Cultural Day dinner is on Friday, and I'm going to attend that at their invitation. So I'll let you know how it went. That's it. So we're going to recess into an executive session for about 15 minutes pursuant to RCW 4230-110-1I to discuss with our legal counsel litigation or potential litigation, and for approximately 10 minutes pursuant to 4230-110-1G to review the performance of a public employee. We're not expected to take action following the executive session. So this time we'll be in recess.